Hello and welcome everybody, Kicker of Elves here. So, this season I hit Infinite in week 1. I've hit Infinite every season since December 2022, so this is my 36th time hitting Infinite. And every season the climb's a little bit different. Meta's going to be different, what cards are popular, what new releases, and the amount of decks I use. But this season I hit Infinite using only 2 decks. Now, of course, I messed around. I picked up Cerebro after the Golden Gauntlet Championships. I dabbled here and there with Man Spider, but really I just spammed 2 decks, and that was all I needed to hit Infinite, and the same can be said for you. So today, I'm going to do a quick walkthrough, quick overview of these 2 decks. So if you're on the climb to Infinite right now, or if you're just trying to hit rank 60 to get that variant, or you want to push up to top 10% Infinite, whatever your goals are, these 2 decks are going to help you hit Infinite, climb the ladder, and have a ton of fun doing it. So let's talk about the first deck. The first deck I used that I think is a very, very powerful list, even into the current meta and high Infinite today, is the Storm, War Machine, Legion lockdown list. Now, for anybody who's been playing for a long time, you might remember the era of Professor X or original Spider-Man when lane lockdown was a lot more common. The devs have made a lot of recent updates to steer away from decks that say, you can't play guards. Clog just got nerfed with debris. Professor X is in shambles of what he used to be. Spider-Man is a completely reworked card. Doc Ock only pulls 1 card. There's been so many adjustments over the years. And the last real bastion for a lockdown style list is this list. It relies on getting to do the lockdown combination, I should say. You need to play Storm on 3, War Machine into another location on 4, Legion into the Storm location on 5. That's just those 3 cards, but if you're able to draw that, if you see that in hand on turn 3, you should snap because you will get 2, or if the opponent's feeling cocky, they'll snap back before they realize what you're doing because you haven't played Storm yet. Again, do this before you play Storm on turn 3, and you'll get 4 cubes. You're never going to get 8 cubes unless you're playing a bot, which can be very funny, but this deck for me was a very reliable way. The lines are clear, you're not doing all this bouncing around with some other decks. It's, do I have these 3 cards? Do I have Storm, War Machine, Legion? If so, I snap. And if I don't, this deck has a really great backup game plan where you're doing ramp combinations. You've got, even if you're just playing War Machine, you're able to play Ebony Maw, you're able to play Ebony Maw on a later turn. If you go Electro into War Machine, on turn 6, you can play the Infinite and Ebony Maw. You don't even have to worry about your scam lockdown combo, which of course Storm, War Machine, Legion, that principle says, I get to play turn 6, my opponent does not. It is very hard for any deck in the game to win when they don't have a turn 6. Now, of course, what you might be thinking is, hey, that's very finicky, this is a 3-card combo, how often am I going to get that? Now, it's not going to be every single game, but there are a lot of tools for you to accelerate into that. For example, if you have Lockjaw down on turn 2, when you play Storm, you can either Lockjaw your Storm, or when you play Storm, you can play Jubilee into that location, or into another location, and use Lockjaw on the Jubilee. You can even, use Blink on the Jubilee and accelerate that into a Legion. There are so many different ways between Lockjaw, Jubilee, and Blink to rotate set cards out, to either rotate into your combination with Legion to shut down the game with a Storm location, or to get out Doctor Doom, Galactus, or the Infinite. It doesn't matter if you don't have War Machine and Legion. If you play Storm, and then on turn 4 you Jubilee into the Infinite, that location's won. That is a done deal unless you're playing against a move deck that is extremely popping off. Even beyond doing that, Storm is a pretty nice card these days because you are able to pull into Jubilee. You're able to do stuff with Doctor Doom. You're able to make that Storm location your Galactus First Steps location and then just continue to pump power as you won that location and be able to slam down a large Galactus at the end of the turn. The ramp game plan can be understated here as well. Electro did just get buffed to a 3-5, which is respectable stats, but you can play Electro, immediately go into Blink, and you're pulling out any of these other cards. You're pulling out a Jubilee, which can then pull into a Legion or an Infinite. There's so many different lines here. And one card that I feel is very underrated in this list that I love quite a bit, regardless of which game plan, that helped me a lot when climbing, was Ebony Maw. If you play, Ebony Maw has so much snap equity, and let me tell you why. When people see Ebony Maw played down, this is the first time they've run up against this list, they know what you're doing. They know, okay, Storm War Machine Legion, that's coming. But you can sort of bluff a bit. If you have Galactus First Steps in hand and you don't have War Machine and you play Ebony Maw out on turn 1, they immediately have to start contesting. You are going to beat any other play on turn 1 with an Ebony Maw. If you have Galactus First Steps in hand, you're getting him to 14 power. Typically an opponent's going to think, okay, they played Ebony Maw out early, that must mean they have a War Machine. So they're going to start planning around you doing that. They might not know that, hey, you're a total mad lad and you're just playing Ebony Maw, because there's plenty of ways to buff up that location. You can throw Jeff down there. You can get Dr. Doom into there. If you have an Ebony Maw, Jeff, Dr. Doom location and you're storming somewhere else, that Ebony Maw location gets up to 15 power. They're not going to try to conduct... They think with Ebony Maw that they just need to get to 8 power because cards aren't going to go in there, especially if you're not playing War Machine on turn 4. So Ebony Maw, it's an early series card, but it likes for a lot of mind games. And this deck for me, this was the second of the 2 decks that I did. This was not my main deck, but when I was getting tilted, when I was feeling like, okay, I'm struggling a little bit, or maybe I lost a 4 or an 8 cube game, I just wanted to play something where the snap lines are very clear, the power spikes are very simple. I don't need to, bust out my graphing calculator to figure out which cards to move around the board. A little hint on what's coming next. I went to this deck. I call it Mean Machine because of War Machine. There's a Sugar Ray song called Mean Machine that's funny to me, but this is really the Storm War Machine Legion package with the ramp combination from Electro and lots of card rotation or tutoring between Lockjaw, Jubilee, and Blink. Big guys in the form of Infinite and Galactus First Steps. This has a little bit of everything, and even the Galactus First Steps, even the high series cards, the only high series card you absolutely need, I would say, is War Machine. Legion 3,000 tokens get him outright, but this is the only Series 5 card, and Blink, I guess I say. These two feel pretty essential, but you can swap out, you can throw a Giganto in there for Galactus First Steps. It's going to be worse, but hit me up in the comments if you want to talk about like specific card replacements. Like, hey, I don't have this card, what can I go? And I'll definitely chime in there to help you out. So this was the number 2 deck that I used. Very satisfying. You're able to lock out the board. If you're bumping into bots, a lot of the time I found they don't know what to do and might stay in a match on turn 6 if they're ahead, even if you've done the Storm War Machine Legion combination. So scan those bots while you can. You want to get to infinite. The earlier the better, because then you're just playing against players for the rest of it. I understand that for some people you don't have a lot of time, so it might be a month-long process. That's totally fine. This is a deck that's absolutely going to be slow and steady wins the race. You're not getting a lot of 8 cubers, but you will absolutely be able to progress and climb with just this deck to infinite. Now, what was the main deck? For me, it was this lovely list. If you've followed my videos on the channel for the past couple of weeks I've been posting, it should come as no surprise to you that I am talking about the classic Human Torch move list. I think these exact 12 cards, even with the rise of Mercury, even with Erisham coming back, even with that Vayne list that I covered on the channel yesterday that has a lot of anti-move tech with Mercury and Cannonball, I still think these 12 cards are the best cards, the best list in the game. I think Spider-Punk, if you are a free-to-play player, you can swap Spider-Punk for Aranya, but I feel like Spider-Punk is an incredible addition here. So let's zoom out for a second. Let's talk about what are the heuristics of this deck? Why is this deck so powerful? Why was this your main deck when climbing to infinite and doing so in a single week? The main idea behind this deck is the plan A is you want to get one location with a massive point scaler, Human Torch, and then steal another location using Juggernaut. If you watch, like me, a lot of Marvel Snap content, you've probably seen some top decks of the week's list where this is prominently featured in the top slot, but you might notice with the discerning eye that Juggernaut has been swapped for Aranya. It's the same list, but instead of Juggernaut, you have Aranya. I cannot stress this enough. Never cut Juggernaut for Aranya. Aranya is an excellent card. I thought when we got Spider-Punk I might be cutting Kraven don't do that. I didn't do that. Craven's ended up, I really turned around on Craven. But this list, when you are drawing correctly and just doing plays, you can get Human Torch to a ridiculous amount of power. You do not need Araña in there to boost Torch even more. There are so many ways between Cloak, Hellion, Madam Web, Ghost Spider. Heimdall is your backup plan in my view on turn 6. There are so many ways for you to get Human Torch moving and moving more than once. Sparky, a huge force multiplier here. A criticism I've heard of this deck when you have Araña in the version is saying like, oh, well, the opponent's going to try to avoid your Human Torch location. Human Torch is so obviously, it's almost like a, it's the same idea as like a Moonstone or a Dracula to a lesser extent. Human Torch is way better than those cards, but where it's like you play Human Torch and opponent's immediately thinking not, oh, how do I beat that Human Torch? If they have a Shadow King or a Mercury, then like, yes, they're trying to do that, but they're thinking, okay, Human Torch is going to get so big it wins one location. I'm going to focus on the other 2 locations. And that becomes way easier when you don't have Juggernaut. I think Juggernaut is the best card in the game. You get Human Torch massive and ideally get a Cosmo in the same location. That is not, they cannot interact with that card anymore. Not unless they're playing Magneto, which is not very popular, and then in which case they're moving the Human Torch again. In this game plan, you get Human Torch huge, and then because you have a lot of other cards like Cloak, like Ghost Spider, like Craven to an extent, but mainly Cloak and Ghost Spider, that have very respectable powers for their cost, Cloak being a 2/4, Ghost Spider being a 1/3, that you can target another location and say, I play Juggernaut here because they're going to try and avoid the location where my Human Torch is. That's going to move cards to either the location they're already going to win or back into my Human Torch lane, which they cannot win because Human Torch is so massive. That's going to get you, and that's what got me, tons of 4 and 8 cube wins. Not playing Araña to make Human Torch even bigger. So that is, if you take away one thing from this video and you want to use the move list to climb to infinite, do not cut Araña for Juggernaut. Juggernaut is going to win just as many games as Human Torch. Because even though I'm talking a lot about Human Torch because he's the best scaler, if you're moving Dagger around, if you're moving Spider-Punk around, especially if you're moving her into location with Craven, you can use any of those cards to just achieve the condition of one location is so large that they're not going to bother with it, or that they're not realistically going to be able to contest it. Steal another location with Juggernaut. Additional concepts here. I prefer Madam Web over Sparky. If you're trying to do turn 2 plays, get Madam Web down first. I was on Snap Judgecast. Thanks again, Glazer, for having me with him and Roram this past week, and we were going over a tier list. I fought pretty hard to get Madam Web into S tier over Sparky, but I was outvoted pretty much. Sparky is incredible, but you get Madam Web down turn 2. You're skipping turn 1 with this deck. Probably goes without saying, but don't play Ghost Spider on 1. Skip that. You get Madam Web down. You get Human Torch or a Dagger or a Spider-Punk into the Madam Web location. You start moving things around. It feels phenomenal. A couple of key lines that really helped me were that if you have Hellion on turn 5, that is almost always going to be your turn 5 play. You want to use your Hellion to readjust your cards around the board to be able to say, okay, I'm going to keep Human Torch here. I'm gonna pull Madam Web, and I'm gonna leave the Craven and the Ghost Spider in that location because I'm gonna steal the Juggernaut. It lets you just get kind of a free board reposition. 5/8 is pretty decent stats power for the effect that he has. And if you are going for a Heimdall endgame, because you're not gonna have Juggernaut in hand every single time you play this list, the important thing to do is to make sure that after you Heimdall, that you have your Human Torch and your Dagger, or your Human Torch and your Spider-Punk in separate locations. Early on when you're playing this list, it might be complicated, and there's going to be some times where Human Torch, Dagger, and Spider-Punk all end up in the same location, and like you have one lane with 112 power, and then one lane with 3 power and one lane with 10 power, and you still lose or whatever. That's going to happen. I recommend taking this into Conquest to practice a little bit, but that is a very important consideration for Heimdall. In a dream world, if you have Heimdall, if you have Hellion in hand, what you can do is, once you have Human Torch or one of your other scalers on the board, is use Cloak on turn 4. If you don't have Hellion in hand, save Cloak for turn 5. Using Cloak on turn 5 is much worse for the Juggernaut endgame plan because you're giving your opponents the option to move cards to, and that makes the lane math of like, okay, can I win this location with 5 power by playing Juggernaut a bit more difficult. But being able to go into turn 5 using either Cloak or Hellion to just change the board states, you're getting your movers around, is extremely powerful. Craven is an underrated card in that context because as you move him and other people, especially if you're able to do like a turn 4 Cloak on the right, on the middle location, Craven in the left location, your opponent's really going to have to think, okay, they've got Craven down. If I move 2 cards over there, am I just giving them a free 4 power on top of the other cards you're doing there? Craven can easily get to 10 power in this list. He can easily threaten a lane on his own, all while you're making Human Torch 36, 72, 140 some odd power. Cosmo, very great. This deck can afford to run tech in the form of Cosmo and Juggernaut. Cosmo most of the time is going to be a Human Torch protector in this list, or a protector of your dagger, your spider punk, whatever that is. And other times, if you have Cosmo and Madam Web, a very underappreciated tech line here is that even if you don't have priority, if you have Cosmo and Madam Web and you move that to another location, that move happens before any cards reveal. You get to bypass priority and make sure you have your Cosmo in a location to disrupt their Mr. Negative play. If they're being greedy playing Destroy and they've filled up a location with a Headpool, Deadpool, Moira X, and they're trying to play Carnage there, you Cosmo that location is completely boned for them unless they're playing Killmonger. Cosmo is fantastic. Spider-Punk in particular, I want to talk about him in this list, feels so strong because of that you can move this card once condition. You're able to easily get this card up to an effective 311 or 315 because you can move him into Madam Web. Sparky is there to move stuff around after the fact. A weakness this deck has, if you're trying to go for the Juggernaut game plan, is that if your opponent's filling the board a lot, it can be very difficult to, Juggernaut doesn't work if there's no space to move the cards. In that situation, Sparky plus Dagger. If you're moving Dagger from Madam Web into, let's say, the Madam Web location, your opponent has 4 cards there. You move Dagger to another location where they have 3 cards, and you Sparky Dagger back, that's like a 20 power swing just off of a single move, divorced from any of the other cards you were playing. So I could go on. I did about a 40-minute guide on this exact list with Orania swapped in for Spider-Punk because it was the end of last season. So definitely check that out if you want to dive really deep into this concept. Or of course, if you have questions about this, just let me know in the comments. But this is by far the deck I used the most to climb to Infinite. This and the Storm War Machine Legion were the 2 decks I used to hit Infinite this season in week 1. And yeah, I strongly feel that with a little bit of practice, like honestly, I'm not saying days practice, take this list, play a couple matches of Conquest, do Proving Grounds, do Silver, do Gold, play 5 Conquest matches or whatever, and you'll get the fundamentals of this down. Take this onto Ladder, you're going to soar to Infinite. You're going to have a great time just like I did. And with that, I just want to say thank everybody. Thanks for tuning in. I really, really am enjoying the game right now. The meta's in a very fun spot. And I find that once I'm able to hit Infinite, kind of de-stress a little bit, mess around with some funny decks, try and play first Ghost Rider. There you go, Roram. Do some of that stuff, and it feels great. So really hope this helps. Really hope you're able to take some of this advice and pilot these decks that I featured to Infinite. I think they are very, very strong and well positioned in the entire meta game right now. And yeah, that's it for tonight. Those of you who have made it this far, thanks so much. Please hit that subscribe button, that like button. There's been some really awesome growth. I really appreciate everybody supporting me early on in this YouTube journey. I've been playing this game for 3 freaking years, but only started making content these past couple of weeks on YouTube, other than articles I wrote, 3 years ago for Snap. So it's very fun doing that. But yeah, please leave a comment. I will, whether you want to talk about deck replacements or just card options or even just different lists that you're using, I'm happy to chime in down there and give you advice and just talk through things. Even if you don't want to talk about Marvel Snap, you want to just talk about FLCL, 90s indie rock, meal prep with Cajun chicken cutlets, I'm there for that too. But again, thank you all so much for watching. I'm Kicker of Elves, and I will see you next time. Bye.